Hello everybody, I'm going to give an introduction to the organisational improvement module, and in doing that I'm going to cover some of the academic territory of the Institute for Educational Cybernetics. So I'm going to say something about organisation because it's a big word and cybernetics is about organisation, and I'm going to say something about the history of cybernetics and the key players, many of whom we refer to in our work on the education system, and whose work I think could be useful to you in you understanding the organisational context of your work. I'm going to finish this presentation by setting you a challenge for you to engage in the Moodle forum. But first of all, I want to introduce this topic of organisation. When we think about the word organisation, we think of it both as a noun, an organisation, and as a verb, you organise something. Now, as a noun, I suppose you could say, well, your organisation, it might look a bit like this. It's a tree structure, a set of power relationships between the boss and all the employees. But that's one type of organisation. Here's another. And another. And another. And my favourite of all is these are the self-organising cubic crystals of pyrite. And perhaps why this seems to me astonishing is that we think of organising as something very human, as something biological at very least. But actually, in the case of pyrite, it's something which simply emerges out of the structure of atoms. So what about the human activity of organising? To organise as a verb? Well, we can do all sorts of things as human beings in organising things. We can stick things into boxes to keep them nice and orderly, and perhaps similarly we can arrange flowers to make them look pretty. We can organise ourselves to do some rather peculiar things in the water, but it's not just humans, of course, because we see also animals seem to display some of the same symptoms of organisation. And when we talk about organisation, we must also talk about disorganisation, disorder. And some would argue, even for those with very disorderly rooms and desks, that they are in fact organised, which can of course be rather perplexing for those who have a different idea of what to be organised means. But in fact, this is an interesting example, because if people say they're organised and yet display something which doesn't appear to be organised, what they're really saying is they're in control of the situation that they're in. And control is fundamental to understanding organisation. And when we talk about control, we also have to talk about viability, or the thing that enables things to survive in their environment. If your brain wasn't able to control the movements of your heart, then you would no longer be viable. And it doesn't really matter how your brain controls the movements of your heart, providing it does it in one way or another. Now, in order to be in control of something, it's important to have some idea of what it is you're taking control of. And this is where cybernetics has really come into its own in developing ways of modelling systems. And a model gives us a way of taking control of some particular situation. And there are many varied and fascinating models of different control systems which have emerged from the cybernetic field. Now, here's a picture of Stafford Beer. He's one of the key cyberneticians, and he developed a model called the viable system model. You can see it here. I'm not going to go into any detail, but we find it very useful. Stafford Beer worked with this man, Fernando Flores. Fernando Flores developed a model of the way people communicate with one another, and this has been very influential in technology. Flores was very influenced by Gregory Bateson, who you can see here with his wife Margaret Mead. Now, both Bateson and Mead were interested in communication, and they were anthropologists, and they spent their time trying to understand tribal societies and modern society and how people communicate. Bateson was very influential on a Chilean biologist called Humberto Maturana, who you see here. And Maturana was interested in modelling the behaviour of biological organisms, right down from cells to viable biological organisms, and he was also interested in how things communicate and the extent to which communication was also biological. This is Maturana's model of a phenomenon that he calls structural coupling, something that he saw at the cellular level between cells, which he also believes goes on in language. Maturana's work has been very influential in sociology through the work of a German sociologist called Niklas Luhmann. And Luhmann believes that communications in society behave in the same way that Maturana describes biological processes. And so Luhmann has used the same sorts of models to explain communication in society as Maturana used to explain the interactions between cells. And just to bring us a bit more up to date, this is Chris Argyris, who was very influenced by Bateson's ideas, and Peter Senger, who was a student of Argyris, and they developed the idea around double loop learning, which is very important to our whole approach on this course and to the way that we believe that you can make a difference in your workplace. So you can see that there's this long heritage, a long list of people who've made this link between organisation, control and modelling, and it's that really which I want to talk about in terms of you improving your work. Now we just started talking about the double loop learning idea, and actually fundamental to this really is the idea that you plan something to do, and in order to plan something to do you've got to have some idea of what it is you're faced with, and so there must be some way that you make distinctions about the workplace, and in this module we're going to help you do that. But all of the models that I've talked about, so we have structural coupling model, or double loop learning even, or even Luhmann's different distinctions about communication, or Beer's viable system model. All of these different models give you different ways of trying to make distinctions about what it is that's going on in the workplace, so that you can actually start to think, what can I do? And this modelling thing is really fundamental. And the point is, it raises incredibly difficult issues. Here's some examples. Who are you to say what's going on? Maturana, for example, argues that it's impossible to stand outside your perspective as an observer and to have some unique view on the system. It's an interesting question. And what about perception and communication and emotion in the workplace? All of these things are terribly important to our day-to-day experience. How do we make sense of that? Maybe Luhmann's got some answers for us there. How do you know something's really an improvement? The whole issue of evaluating what it is that we do is absolutely fundamental, and again, having models can help. Okay, so here's an exercise. What I would like you to do is I'd like you to discuss with each other some of the organisational issues relating to your workplace, but I want you to do it in a particular way, and this is a bit experimental so it may not work, but I want you to only talk to each other through questions. So don't make any statements, just ask questions to each other. We'll review it in a week or so and see how it's gone. So I hope that was interesting, and I look forward to some interesting discussions.